Hello, everybody, and welcome to BullionStar Perspectives. My name is Ronan Manley, and today we're delighted to have with us William Purpura, who is chairman of the COMEX Governors Committee. And William also has a very long and successful career trading commodities in New York and Dubai and Singapore and in Shanghai. And he is currently the principal of GLT Direct DMCC in Dubai. Hello, William. You're very welcome.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me, Ronan.
When I was looking at your bio, you have a very broad bio. Would you be able to give the viewers a flavor for your long career trading commodities in the States and elsewhere?
Sure. The bulk of my trading was, and my experience was in the futures markets, which I began in 1976 was the first year I got involved. I started trading around 1979, and mainly that's when I gravitated to gold trading because of all of the things that were going on with the gold market at that time. I moved to New York in 1983 and became a member of COMEX, and still a member of COMEX. We did a floor brokerage and trading company that I had called Great Lakes Metals. We dealt with a lot of the banks and funds and things like that. So that was a lot of fun until 2007, when the internet put us out of business and everything went electronic. But then after that switched, I ran a proprietary trading company. We did arbitrage between the Shanghai gold markets and the New York gold markets. We also did a lot of energy trading out of our New York office. Sold that trading company in 2017. And then just recently, over the last 2 years, started doing some trading in Dubai, but more on the physical trading part. And we're concentrating more on energies than we are on metals. So we have a company here in the DMCC in Dubai, and we're focused on trading energies and physical energies and brokering physical trades. But I've also been on the COMEX side. I'm still the chairman of the COMEX Governors Committee, which is the legacy board of directors from when COMEX was a standalone exchange. And through the series of mergers, this committee has become a committee that advocates for the COMEX members and tries to promote the gold markets along with the CME group, and who own COMEX at this time. So that's pretty much my background right now.
So you're a four-time chairman of the COMEX committee and going up for your fifth term. So would you be able to give like a quick overview of where the committee sits in relation to the CME and the NYMEX board and the member firms? Do you represent the firms, or do you report back to the board? Is it actually like an intermediary between all of the firms and the board?
Well, we're right now we're more of an advisory committee to the CME board, which is the COMEX board. So there's a kind of a misconception that the Governors Committee is the board of directors for the COMEX, and it's not. We're more an advisory committee, but they're all elected positions by the COMEX members. There are 772 COMEX memberships, and so those are the people that will elect our committee. And we're there to protect the legacy rights of the COMEX, to make sure that the rights and the interests of the members are our foremost thing. But those rights coincide and those interests coincide with the interests of the gold market and with the CME and COMEX. So that's really what our function is. And so we liaise with the COMEX board, which is the CME board, and with the staff over at CME that run the metals division.
I know we were speaking about the functions of a futures market, and specifically with precious metals. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what futures do, what is the purpose of COMEX, and what is the purpose of large volume of trading that goes on in COMEX. So would you be able to give a practitioner's summary of what actually COMEX futures market does and what benefits it provides to the wider global gold market?
Well, there's a misconception on the futures market. A lot of people like to call it the paper market, and to a large degree it is, but it's really, the futures markets are there for risk management and price discovery, and that's why they were founded in the US back in the 1860s. And that's what their function is. Now the speculative and investment end of it comes in to provide liquidity. You need liquidity in a market. So if someone wants to get rid of risk, you have to have someone that's willing to take that risk. So the combination is all of those players, the speculative and the hedging part and the risk management part, that's what makes the market. So the reason that COMEX is successful is because of liquidity. That's where the massive liquidity comes in, and that's where the price discovery function of the market comes in. So that's what it is. The exchange doesn't trade. The COMEX as an exchange does not take positions in the market. It really is, it's a forum and a platform for buyers and sellers to get together. And so that's really what the markets are for, and that's the function of those markets. It's not, to serve any special interests or anything like that. That's what the markets are for.
A lot of people will be aware of the GC 100 100-ounce gold contract and the SI 5000 silver contract. Does the fact that they are physically settlable make them in any way better for price discovery compared to if they were just cash settled? The fact that they are backed by the ability to settle in physical metal.
Well, that's why any physical contract will say, the reason that it's constructed that way is so that the futures market at expiration will converge to where the cash market is. Yeah. Because if there's a discrepancy in that, you're going to have arbitrageurs that will either bring gold in or buy gold or sell gold to get that into line with the cash market, because it's actually going to, when it goes into the delivery process, you're going to see that conversion that comes in. And so that's what keeps the market, the integrity of the market to the real market. That's the cash market. So it reflects what's going on in the cash market. And that'll happen in any commodity, whether it's you're trading energies or grains or anything like that. That's just the function of the deliverable. Cash settled contracts, like a lot of the energy contracts, are be based off of another benchmark, such as Platts or things like that, where they'll converge for their settlement. But this will actually, it could be settled in a physical manner too when the market goes into its delivery stage.
I suppose this year, 2020, is more than any year in recent memory, a year in which the physical aspects of the COMEX as regards precious metals have come to the fore. And really that means in terms of the fact that there's huge amounts of physical metal has flown to New York from all around the world, gold and silver into the vaults in New York. And the inventories of those vaults have now shot up. And there's been a huge amounts of deliveries happening in those contracts. And when I say deliveries, for people who don't understand that, it's warrants changing hands, which represent gold bars in those vaults. So long and short holders of those contracts are swapping the ownership of those warrants in the vaults. Do you have a view on why this year in particular there's been a huge spike in the inflows, the inventories, the delivery warrant transactions, and was it connected to the EFP spread blow up in late March between the futures price in New York and the London spot price?
Of course, it had something to do with that, as did the rest of the world affected by this, and with transportation dislocations. We see that in like the physical stuff that we're trading here is logistics and things, and so logistics, and shutdowns of the Swiss refinery really caused that the inability to convert the large bars in London to kilo bars or 100-ounce bars that would be deliverable in COMEX, and they couldn't get them into New York. So I think, I don't know anything factual about it, but it seems to me that the reason that we're having record stocks in the COMEX depositories is in case there is we're in a situation where we could have lockdowns at any time. Now we know that there's plenty of gold in there, and that should preclude the dislocation that we had and the EFP anomaly that we saw during that time. We saw the same thing in the energies, where energy prices actually went negative. So that was even more drastic than what happened in gold, but that was all COVID related and storage related as far as the energies go.
Nobody seems to be withdrawing metal from the COMEX approved vaults. Is that a sign that the holders who ownership was transferred to are holding gold to trade it in future? Or are they just holding it as a long-term investment and the COMEX vaults are the most suitable place to hold it? Or do you think that they will gradually start withdrawing that metal?
Well, I think when you look at those statistics, you have to understand that the deliveries, there could be a velocity to delivery. So the same material could be delivered, redelivered at the same time. So I just anecdotally, when I was on the trading floor, once in a while I would have a long position going into delivery mindset, and I'd get delivery on it. And I said, well, I really don't want it. So I would sell it out and I would redeliver it. So that same gold, if someone else got it that didn't really want to take it, they would redeliver it as well. So you may have the same material. So deliveries, the amount of deliveries does not necessarily mean that it's all different gold. It could be the same gold changing hands. So you may have, banks or whoever is settling those deliveries, within the system, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be withdrawn. So a lot of times, as you mentioned, Ronan, is that the deliveries are just basically changing ownership within the system. And it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to take it out. And for the most part, you don't want to take it out of the system if you're going to keep using it, if you're going to take it out of the chain of integrity. So if you take it out of the system completely, then in order to get it back in, you're going to have it reassayed and things like that. If it stays in, if it moves from a Brinks vault and you physically move it to a JP Morgan vault or a Scotia vault within New York, it stays within that chain of integrity, and the warrant can stay intact. But if I took delivery on gold and took it out of the system, in order for me to put it back in, again, there's a cost to doing it. So it makes sense, I think, to keep it. The old thing about gold is you spend all this money to dig it out of the ground, and then you put it back in the ground in a vault someplace and keep it there. So that's really, I think, what we're seeing right now. So a lot of the deliveries are stuff that may have been going on outside of COMEX, but now it's there. You're seeing more of the physical part, and you're seeing the hands, the ownerships change during the delivery process. And part of that is the way that the construct of that is that the delivery period takes almost the whole month of that delivery month. So right now in December, we just began in December, so we're in the delivery cycle in December. So the deliveries can happen, all the way through just about the end of the month.
A lot of people are familiar with the concepts of registered gold and eligible gold. And from my understanding, registered gold is gold where COMEX warehouse warrant is already attached to it. So it's either been traded or it can be traded. And eligible gold is just any gold that happens to be in those warehouses that can satisfy the criteria of a tradable bar, which is a 100-ounce bar or a kilo bar. Do you think people get fixated with this concept of how much eligible gold is in those vaults? Because it mightn't have anything to do with COMEX trading at all. It could be just sitting in the vaults. And it brings me to a paper that I noticed in April where the CME had told us, the CFTC, that they also didn't think that a lot of the eligible gold was tradable. It could be just sitting there. They said you could put a 50% haircut on it, basically, to underestimate the amount of eligible gold that's there. So do you think that this metric is really useful, or should we really be looking at something else?
I think it depends what you're looking for. Okay, how much of the gold would they think would be turned into warrants that is being held there by people that would be interested in turning it into warranted gold, and how much is just being stored there, say, for long-term investment or whatever? And I guess it's an estimate. But what it does show, it's informational to show that in those depositories there is gold that would be eligible, to be warranted. So it's they could just put registered stocks in there, but it's just another layer of information about what the makeup is of the inventory in those particular depositories. And it's showing that gold, by being eligible gold, that means that it has stayed in that chain of integrity that I've told you about before, from the refiner to or however it's been in the system. It hasn't left the system, so that gold is eligible to be warranted. Whether it's going to be or not, it depends on the owner of that gold.
What do you make of back in July, the CME mass approved a lot of extra refiner brands in both gold and silver, which were LBMA Good Delivery list refiners, which previously hadn't been part of the CME approved refiner lists. Was that indicating that they just want to open up a lot more refineries to send their metal to New York? Or was it indicating in some way that there might be a shortage of previously eligible brands and they wanted to extend that population universe?
Well, I think what they did was, and I think it's smart, you leverage the LBMA's the LBMA's due diligence and their auditing and their accreditation, and you include that into the more good delivery brands you have that you're confident in, I think the better. So I think it was a natural thing to do, and there's nothing nefarious or anything like that about it. It's just, I think it was a smart thing to do. I think the more eligible brands you have to satisfy the contract that are accredited, the better. But that doesn't mean that the CME can't accredit their own outside of LBMA. It's not exclusive, but when you look at the accredited refineries around the world, most of them that are on CME, even the legacy ones, are LBMA approved. So I don't think there's anything to that other than I think it was a good idea to do that, as a trader, because there's more potential coming in. Now, from a practical sense, you're still going to see most of the gold that's coming in there coming from, the same refineries. I don't think you're going to see, things coming in, rushing into New York from some of the places like Russia or China that are coming into the New York vaults, but at least it's eligible. And if that gold makes it into the system, then you've expanded the universe of eligible gold, and it's been accredited. So it gives you a sense of comfort. And actually it's easier to do that than going out and independently on the COMEX and vetting each one of these.
So at the time when I saw that mass approval happening, my immediate reaction was that they were lining up a change in the settlement venues to allow COMEX contracts to settle in London, in the London vaults, using 400 ounce bars or 1,000 ounce silver bars. Do you think there's any accuracy to my initial view, or could down the line contracts be introduced which do settle in London or can use the gold and silver that is in the London vaults?
Well, I don't think that from a practical sense, I don't think that's going to happen. They would have to displace the 100 ounce contract. And just going back to what the futures markets are, the liquidity is in the 100 ounce contract on COMEX, and COMEX is a futures exchange, not a physical exchange. There is a physical aspect to the futures, but I don't think COMEX is trying to be London or exclude it and trying to be something that it's not. Now, I think, and you cannot change that COMEX contract, the 100 ounce contract, to be delivered in another place because of the rules and because of the bylaws and those contracts. So as long as there's open interest in the 100 ounce contract, you're not going to be able to change that contract and have it delivered someplace. It's got to be delivered within 150 miles of New York City. So it's a New York based contract, and that's it. There would have to be a new contract, if in gold to go into a global deliveries. Now, COMEX, we did put one in, a kilo contract that's deliverable in Hong Kong. We put that in some years ago. That never really took off, but that was one instance, but that was a separate contract. It was a kilo contract, and the delivery point was Hong Kong. And that was strategically because a lot of the kilo bars and a lot of the center of gravity for a lot of the physical trading had moved to that part of the world, Hong Kong, Singapore. So that was an attempt to put in a small contract, which would be basically a mini contract. And at the time, there was when gold back in 2011 was making its highs. It seemed like a good idea. But again, the market is going to go to where the liquidity is. And just everybody has to understand what each component is, the function is. And again, COMEX provides the liquidity for the price discovery. And I don't see the 100 ounce contract being changed and scrapped to go to someplace else.
So what was, you probably recall there was a 400 ounce contract launched by CME at the beginning of April, which is called the Enhanced Gold Delivery Contract, has a ticker symbol 4GC. And that was trumpeted as being able to be settled in either a 400 ounce bar, a 100 ounce bar, or kilobars. But it never took off really, and the trading volume is minuscule. What was really happening when it was launched, and was it in some ways a failure because it didn't have any trading volume? Or was it only created just to create an infrastructure to allow a 400 ounce bar in?
Yeah, I think it was to allow that in case we ran into a situation where 400 ounce bars could get into the system, and then you could use the EFP markets or things like that. But it was never, I don't think anybody had any delusions that it was going to be trading a lot. For instance, if you're trading a 400 ounce contract, that's a pretty big tick size, you know, for a trader. So it's very difficult for liquidity people to come in. It's a very, very large contract. So, you know, currently, if you have gold at, if gold was at 2,000, the COMEX contract, the regular contract now, the notional value on that would be $200,000. If you're trading a 400 ounce contract, you're talking about an $800,000 notional contract, and the margin on that would preclude so many market participants coming in that you're not going to get liquidity on that. So I think it was there more to let the system accommodate it if needed to take 400 ounce bars into the system without changing the COMEX contract. It would have been very difficult to allow like an ACE thing to come into the 100 ounce contract and change that from what the CFTC and everything like that. It would have changed the contract, which we couldn't do. So that was the spirit of doing that. I don't think there were, at least on my perspective, I never thought there was much chance of that taking off. You know, as trading, it was more as a venue you could do block trades or things like that to settle that. And if you take a look at over-the-counter clearing and things like central clearing on bilateral trades, COMEX and especially NYMEX have all of these specialized futures contracts that are listed to go on to Clearport, where you don't see regular trading liquidity going there, but they're designed to specifically address, you know, a certain sector of the market. And I think they put this in more as a safety valve to, if 400 ounce bars had to come into the system, there was a way of getting them into it.
The LBMA system in London, the London Gold Market, and the COMEX Gold Market in New York are the two primary markets in the world for gold price discovery. In some ways, they're separate, even though they have the same main players. A lot of the same bullion banks are dominant in each. More recently, they've been cooperating slightly as regards assuring the market back in March that everything was okay and there was enough gold to settle obligations, even though maybe it wasn't in the right place. Do you think that the LBMA and COMEX, as two separate entities, should be cooperating, or could it open up the possibility of accusations of collusion?
Well, I don't think cooperation necessarily means collusion. I can see how some people that may have an agenda to start with could point to something like that and turn it into something it's not. I think they both recognize that they're both important parts of the market, and you know, no one said that about COMEX in Shanghai when they listed a Shanghai futures settled contract on COMEX, or when we opened one up in Hong Kong, that there was collusion or anything like that. What you're trying to do is integrate the markets to give people trading opportunities to do arbitrage, and arbitrage is very important. Arbitrage is one thing that keeps, particularly in gold, that keeps the markets in line without getting, you know, out of whack. Problem we had is, again, with the anomaly that we had with the EFP market earlier this year was more of a function of logistics than it was of any type of market. You know, the markets actually worked. If you look at it that way, you had New York prices and you had London prices. Usually the arbitrage would keep that in line, or the physical arbitrage by moving gold to where it needs to be. But that part of the market was paralyzed. But the same thing, I mean, we traded Shanghai gold against New York gold a lot, and our arbitrage efforts actually helped keep those markets in line globally. Gold is one thing that it's the same no matter where it is. It's gold. It's not a different grade of oil or something like that. So it's much easier to keep those markets in line. And the more those are integrated, a lot of that will flow into COMEX for hedging reasons or whatever, because that's where the liquidity is. So when you need to lay off risk, or if you want to speculate, you're going to go where liquidity is. And that is out of the whole ecosystem on the financial end and of the trading end. Both markets are very important.
I was going to ask you shortly about the LBMA in more depth on a few different topics. But before we switch to the LBMA, there was one thing that on COMEX as regards delivery that I'm always a bit confused of. So if you have a long and a short, and they transfer a warrant representing a gold bar between them, I was always under the impression that the long calls for delivery and then the short has to deliver. But I was reading somewhere that it's actually the opposite. The short initiates the delivery. Is that true? And if that's true, then how does the long indicate that they want to take delivery if it's the short that initiates the delivery?
Well, the long, what it is, so there's a cycle that goes through the delivery process. So you start out with the first notice day, which happens just before the delivery month, where you'll put notice out that, that I want to make or take delivery. But the short will initiate the delivery. You have to have the seller put the thing into the market. So, and that's why there's a period of time where the delivery cycle goes over the month. Now, if you're long, you have to wait until someone has the gold to deliver to you, or until they do it. Now, typically, all of it will happen pretty quickly, because if you want to sell the gold, you want your money. Why would you hold on to the end of the month unless there's something? But it gives the market almost a month to get the supply to satisfy everything. So it's actually a safety feature, but the long has to wait until someone delivers. So they can't just go grab it. And you take the gold from wherever the seller had it. So if the seller has it in a vault in Brinks, that's where the long is going to take it. If it's in Scotia or any of the other depositories, wherever the seller has that warrant, that warrant gets put. And the other thing too is the way it works. Maybe it's a little harder to understand, but it's really between the clearing firms. So if I have an account with my clearing firm and I want to take delivery of gold or make delivery of gold, my clearing firm will deal with the other clearing firm, and then they'll put it into my account. So technically it's between the clearing firms that will do it. And again, that means that there's an assurance that there's money in there to take it. Now, if I want to take delivery of it, I'm going to have to put the money up to be able to do it. Before that, I'm trading on margin. So if I want to really take delivery, I can't take delivery on margin. I have to make sure I have the money to pay for it. And my clearing firm is going to assure that. So that's how the process works. But and if you look at any of the commodity markets, so take copper, for instance, it's always initiated by the seller. But that doesn't mean that the buyer is not going to get it. The buyer may have to wait, which is actually to the buyer's benefit, because he doesn't have to pay right away unless he really needs it to do something with it. But most of the deliveries will happen within the first few days of the delivery cycle. Sometimes it'll extend, and which we've seen, but that again was part of the logistics disruptions that we had. But in the end, that's what allows to go. If the buyer says, "I want it today," well, you're going to get it within this period of time if you really want it. And the system is there to make sure that the sellers have the material to deliver in.
And why, another point related to delivery and vaults, why are there, I would describe as quite a lot of vaults in New York. There's about 8 or 9, and every so often a new vault comes along and wants to be approved. Do those vault owners want to be approved because they make money out of being a COMEX approved vault, or do you think it's a prestige reason and it heightens their profile if they can say that they're a COMEX approved vault? Or is it connected with the flow of trades that the customers of those vaults are making, and they say that it could be a good idea if you get a COMEX approved?
I think it's a little of all of that. So of course, if you're a COMEX approved vault, that does add some gravitas to your, I guess, to your brand, but they don't just take anybody. So you have to be approved. So that you have to have the proper capitalization, and there's a whole process. And I used to be involved in that end of it, where we would approve vaults or things like that, and they had to have proper insurance and whatnot, and and it's just that process. It has to be approved, just like a brand would have to be approved. They would have to go through an approval process, an accreditation process, make sure there's all of the audits and the securities and everything like that satisfy the exchange requirements to do that. So that's really the sense. And you would want as many accredited vaults as you can, but then that's a process of going through the whole process, and the CFTC has to get involved in everything like that.
I think this would be a good time to move on to talk about the LBMA, the London Bullion Market Association. And specifically in the last few weeks, they've hit the headlines because the LBMA, as the self-styled global authority on precious metals, has written a letter to a lot of high-profile bullion centers around the world, including Dubai, India, China, Singapore, saying that these centers need to prove that they're sourcing gold responsibly and that they're following a set of responsible gold sourcing guidelines of the OECD, and that are also supported by NGOs. What's your view on this new initiative by the LBMA, that they're going out around the world and they're actually treading on a few toes in various places, and they seem to have specifically targeted Dubai? And seeing that you're in Dubai, you would have a ground view on what's going on there.
Well, I do, and being in Dubai now, I'm not involved in the gold trade in Dubai. Like I said, my company in Dubai trades more in the energy markets, but I am in the DMCC, which in the DMCC has accredited refineries over here. I think it's a bit unfair, and I think it's a bit of overreach. I think I don't think that they should be threatening other gold centers, particularly. It is a bit hypocritical when you've got your members being fined almost $1 billion. Take a look at your own house. Is my thing, and then also, when they talk about responsible sourcing, they're relying on some of these NGO reports, which I've gone through these things, and I'm not really impressed with the way those were presented. I know a lot about journalism and things like that, and it seems like you're starting with a premise and you're starting with a conclusion and you backfit facts. A lot of the things that you'll see in there, you'll see the words probably or appears to be or this or that, but there's and then they'll go and they've been recycling certain stories that happened 5, 7, 10 years ago here in Dubai, and they keep bringing the same thing up. So I pointed out to that, and I actually talked to some of the reporters. I said, a lot of the references you're making are 5, 6 years old. Now, and you're making it sound like that stuff is still going on, or that same situation is still going on. So I think NGOs, I think people will cherry pick and backfit things that support their conclusion or what they want to do, and then they'll ignore things. Some of the NGO reports, for instance, would list the Dubai refineries, and instead of pointing out the refineries that are, beyond reproach, which most of them are here, they would include in that list, and they make it sound like everyone. So it's the way that it's presented and the perception that it was, and I don't think I'm not particularly fond of using those people, because you don't know what those agendas are. Who's financing those NGOs? What is their agenda? And are they really connected to what the reality of the market is?
Yeah, well, I wrote an article last week about this whole issue, and it was only when I started researching it I realized that a lot of what the LBMA were referring to were existing guidelines that had been published by the OECD back in 2012, 2014, various first edition, second edition, third edition, up until 2016. So none of this was really new. And also, as you mentioned, a lot of those NGOs have their headquarters in places like London and Washington. And it's sort of a misleading name, NGO, because that means non-governmental organization. But a lot of these NGOs are partially financed by governments. So, as you say, it's very difficult to know who's backing who. And even to the extent that maybe some of the banks are prodding behind the scenes to get the NGOs to speak on their behalf. So what do you think of the fact that the LBMA in London claims to be the global authority on precious metals? Is there a need for anyone to be a global authority on precious metals? And if so, is it the LBMA that should have that title, or could another entity like the World Gold Council fill that gap?
Well, I don't think there should be any global authority. There could be an association, but I think what it has to do, I think the best thing that they could do is work with the other centers and cooperate. I remember back in China when the LBMA worked with the PBOC and the good delivery standards for the Chinese gold compared to the LBMA, and it was interesting because they were different. They both seemed like they were valid methods, but they wanted to try to synthesize that so that they had, they were more. They had more things in common. So for instance, like the Chinese would test for like 20 some elements where the LBMA would only test for 6 or 7, and the tolerances for one element. But they got together and did that stuff. But that's what they should do. If the LBMA is really interested in working with responsible sourcing and things like that, they should work to cooperate with that instead of trying to tell people what they should do. That's my opinion. And they're of course, they've got the weight of the accredited refineries, and they can use that as a stick to try to make people do what they feel is right. I think what it does, because they understand that Dubai has a lot of sub-Saharan African gold comes into here, but it makes sense because of where it's logistically placed. But Dubai is a huge center, and it's a big conduit going into one of the biggest markets, which is India. And I think, but the LBMA has said, there will never accredit a refinery in Dubai. Why? There are good refineries here that would pass any type of audits, RMI audits, LBMA audits, and they will not approve one in Dubai. And you have to ask why. So I think, to be honest, I think it's more of a special interest thing. The LBMA, you can consider it almost a special interest group, but to some degree, it's not a large club over there. Mm-hmm. And what we don't like here in Dubai is it seems like they're trying to ostracize Dubai and keep Dubai out of a market. Is it competition? I don't know, but I do know that there are a couple of refineries here in particular that I've vetted myself and actually helped get accredited as a COMEX refinery until the LBMA, or whoever it was, pressured COMEX into dropping that refinery. And part of it had to do with pressure on the markets, pressure on the governments. But believe me, that refinery is as good as any LBMA refinery.
A few weeks ago here on BullionStar Perspectives, we were interviewing Corey Keller, who is a gold refining expert, and he's worked in gold refineries all around the world, including Dubai. One thing he said, which I remember, was that he says that the future home of physical will not be in London or New York. It will be in Asia, because of his perspective of being involved in Dubai for so long and looking out towards the east. And with your background of being in Dubai, and you also, to remind viewers, you used to be a special advisor to the Shanghai Gold Exchange for a number of years. So you've got a broad understanding of what's going on in the gold market in Asia, both in trading and physical. Do you think that the future of gold is not in London and New York and is in Asia as well? Do you think that there's going to be a lot of growth opportunities for places like Dubai as they are the hub and the interface with India and China?
Well, I think there should be. I mean, there already is. Dubai has been very, very active as a gold center for a long time. And also in Asia, again, you saw, especially like say in Singapore, after they dropped the GST over there, a lot of bullion then came in to be stored over there because, and again, when I first started going out to China, that's one of the reasons because of Asia that you see the preference globally now for kilo bars, not for 400-ounce bars. And so as that happens, and the same thing here in Dubai, I do think that if the natural course of competition and everything happened, and you let people go and let competition and market forces go, you would see more of a distribution to these centers, you know, for those physical centers. And again, going into India, if you're going to go into India, if you're going to go into China, it's a global market, and you can move gold in most cases anywhere in the world. So I don't think it needs to be concentrated. You do have political risk, you have country risk in certain areas that you have to be careful of. But no, gold is a global market, and I would let competition determine, you know, where it should go rather than protectivism.
And speaking of China, you set up a company that had an office in Shanghai trading gold and commodities. And because of your background as an advisor to the Shanghai Gold Exchange, you have a probably more than most a view on what's going on in the Chinese gold market. What do you see for the future as regards the Chinese gold market? Do you think it's going to financialize a lot more? And will there be more like derivative contracts on the SGE? Or will the physical specialization of the Shanghai Gold Exchange allow the physical gold market to dominate price discovery more in the future?
Well, I think it doesn't necessarily dominate. Again, it's part of the whole ecosystem. So you do have a need for the financial markets and the futures markets. SGE is an interesting case. I mean, they have a really interesting contract. Their most liquid one is a T+D contract. So you're not really taking, you know, a lot of deliveries technically, where you're not taking things out. And that was the market that we traded, and we provided a lot of liquidity to that. China, though, I think as a gold market is the largest producer, and, you know, either them or India, whatever statistics look at, the largest consumer, but it's contained. So when you take a look at the statistics in China, the import-export restrictions really contain it, and it's not really open to the rest of the world. So that most of the gold stays in China that's mined over there and refined over there, and it doesn't get out to the market for export. And it's difficult, you know, you have to go through a quota system with a limited number of people that are authorized to deliver gold into China. So as long as you have, it's the same thing with the convertibility and the flow of capital in and out of China. Until they do that, they're going to remain the way they are, but they're a very important part of the market. Don't get me wrong, but I would love to see China open up, allow free import and export of gold and coming in, instead of having, anytime you have a government that's restricting it, it's just that, it's a restricted market. I prefer to open the borders on gold and let it flow to wherever it's going to go, rather than have, you know, more of government mandates on it. So that's the thing. That was one of the issues we had in China. So we never got into the delivery process in China. Capital flows across the border, you know, squaring your positions with your arbitrage positions to that were a challenge. But again, the Chinese it's a very important gold market. They've done SGE has done a very good job, and they've been very successful in developing for what they have. And they are, you know, linking with them. They try to link here in Dubai, and they're doing one with COMEX now to try to link the prices. But I think what that does is it helps, those kind of links help keep the Shanghai market more in touch with the global market by virtue of that arbitrage. As far as the rest of the Far East goes, Singapore has become very important. So yeah, you're seeing, you know, more of a democratization of gold as it goes around the world, and I think that's a good thing. It's just you need to have the integrity and the safety issues too, and I think that's why you still have London and New York, where people feel more comfortable in those financial centers and in the security for that. So London and New York are still going to remain important parts. They're not going away. And they're still going to be very, very, but when we talk about dominance, you can't really stop, you really can't stop the flow where it's going to naturally go or where the metal is actually needed.
And finally, going back to COMEX, seeing that you're in the driving seat, so to speak, in the Governors Committee, what do you see in 2021, next year? Any new developments in COMEX? Will the gold inflows go back down, and will there be less physical deliveries? Or is COMEX as a physical delivery point here to stay?
Well, I would like to see it be a larger, but I'm not really in the driver's seat. We're basically a committee, so I don't want anybody to get the. I'm not speaking for CME, which owns COMEX, or anything. I'm speaking as a member, and we really are more of an advisory committee, not in a driving sense, driving policy. But but I would love to see New York be, to be more active in the physical, but that's going to be a natural market for us. Again, I would like to make New York, to see New York as more of a physical center than it really is, and actually compete a little bit for that. I think it has, and as a financial center, it's the financial center of the world still, and I would love to see that happen. But I think it's going to be market forces that do it, and they're going to be, other centers. London is going to make it as attractive to keep that in London, and it's competition. And if the competition is fair and it's allowed to go, the market's going to decide what happens.
Great. So thank you very much, William, for your time. There's a lot of information about COMEX which people previously didn't know, and we'll learn a lot from this. So thanks again.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure being here, and I hope to be back.
Okay, great. Thank you.